Every year, the global herbicide industry pulls in over $30 billion. A large portion of that money goes toward one specific job: killing plants that grow where people decided they shouldn't. Not plants that are toxic, not plants that spread disease. Just plants growing in the wrong place, according to someone. Here's the thing about that. The plants on the receiving end of most of that chemical attention happen to have some of the longest histories of feeding and healing people of anything growing in the temperate world. Some of them were cultivated crops. Some of them were emergency food sources during wars and famines. Some of them were so valuable that people carried them across oceans just to make sure they'd have them on the other side. So in today's video, we cover 6 plants currently growing uninvited in backyards and garden borders across the temperate world. All 6 have documented histories as food, medicine, or both. All 6 cost nothing and maintain themselves. And in several cases, all 8 outperform what most people are spending money to grow right next to them. By the end of this video, the stuff growing in the cracks of your driveway is going to look a little different. Welcome to Lost Green Lore. If you enjoy this kind of content, you will really help us out if you could like the video and hit that subscribe button. Thank you. Now moving on. Number 6, chickweed. Most gardeners don't think much about late February. There's nothing to plant yet, nothing to harvest, and the raised beds are just sitting there waiting. That window, between the last of the stored autumn harvest and the first spring crop, is one of the oldest food security problems in human history. Cultures built entire preservation traditions around it. And even with all of that, late winter was historically the thinnest point in the annual food calendar. Chickweed fills that window, and it does it without being asked. It starts growing in late winter, weeks before the last frost date in most temperate climates, spreading in low, dense mats across garden edges and disturbed soil. The leaves are small, soft, and mild, closer in flavor to baby spinach than anything sharp or bitter. Raw in a salad, wilted into eggs, added to a soup. It works in all of those. Nutritionally, it delivers vitamin C, calcium, magnesium, and iron at a time of year when fresh plant material is otherwise almost entirely absent from most diets. The timing is what makes it genuinely valuable. A plant that produces edible greens in late winter fills a gap that no summer crop, however nutritious, can fill from storage. You can't freeze enough kale in October to solve a February problem the same way chickweed solves it by simply growing when nothing else will. What makes it even more useful long-term is what happens with the seeds. One plant produces around 800 of them, and those seeds can remain viable in soil for up to 10 years. Once chickweed finds your garden, it is there permanently, returning every late winter on its own, feeding whoever is paying attention, then dying back by early summer to free up the space for whatever comes next. Number 5, broadleaf plantain. There is a practical test for broadleaf plantain that requires no preparation, no equipment, and about half a minute. Find a fresh leaf, crush it between your fingers until it breaks down slightly, and press it against a mosquito bite, a minor cut, or a bee sting. The anti-inflammatory response starts within minutes. It's been used this way, as an immediate field remedy, across European folk medicine, Native American healing traditions, and military field guides for centuries. And the compounds responsible for that response, aucubin and allantoin, have since been identified and studied in laboratory settings. That's worth leading with because most people encounter broadleaf plantain as just a flat, stubborn weed in their lawn and never get further than pulling it. The plant, low rosette, heavily ridged oval leaves, growing in compacted and abused soil, arrived in North America with European settlement and spread so aggressively along every disturbed trail and cleared path that Native Americans had a specific name for it: white man's foot. It tracked human movement westward across the continent, colonizing footpaths, roads, and camp clearings faster than almost any other plant. That same quality, a preference for compacted, disturbed ground, means it grows reliably in the exact spots most other plants refuse: driveways, footpaths, lawn edges, anywhere the soil has been beaten flat. Nutritionally, it mirrors dandelion closely, high in calcium, vitamins A, C, and K, with a mineral density that makes the young spring leaves worth adding to salads or cooking into soups before they toughen in summer. But the medicinal use is the detail that tends to stick with people, because it works in real time and requires nothing beyond the leaf itself. The plant is already in most yards. The application is immediate. Those two things rarely line up that cleanly. Number 4. Purslane. The omega-3 supplement market is worth several $billion a year. Fish oil capsules, algae-based soft gels, flaxseed pills. A significant portion of all that spending targets one specific nutrient gap: alpha-linolenic acid, the plant-based omega-3 fatty acid that most Western diets consistently underdeliver. Purslane delivers more of it than any other leafy plant on Earth. The plant, low-growing, fleshy oval leaves, slightly reddish stems, showing up in garden beds and sidewalk cracks and bare soil across most of the world, carries 300 to 400 milligrams of alpha-linolenic acid per 100-gram serving. That is more than spinach, more than kale, more than any other land-based green, by a margin significant enough that nutritional researchers have specifically noted it as a dietary resource in studies on plant-based omega-3 availability. The flavor is mild and slightly lemony, with a succulent texture that holds up in salads, soups, and sautéed dishes. In Turkey, it has been a cultivated summer vegetable for centuries. In Greece, it goes into salads and pitas. Across the Middle East, it appears in cooked dishes in the same way spinach appears in Western cooking. The classification of purslane as a weed is specifically a Western designation, and a relatively recent one at that. What makes it particularly useful compared to most garden plants is how it behaves in difficult conditions. Purslane is a C4 photosynthesis plant, which means it thrives in heat and drought, the exact conditions that stress conventional vegetables. While tomatoes are wilting in August and the lettuce has bolted, purslane is at peak growth. It wants the conditions that damage everything else in the garden. The plant most people throw on the compost heap in the middle of summer is peaking in both size and nutrition at exactly that moment, growing in the gaps left by everything that gave up. Number 3. Dandelion. European settlers did not find dandelions growing in North America when they arrived. They brought them, packed them deliberately as a food and medicine source for the crossing and the settlement that followed. Before global food transport and refrigeration, a plant that produced edible material from early spring through late autumn, required no cultivation, and delivered reliable nutrition was worth carrying. So it was carried across the Atlantic on purpose. It adapted immediately, spread faster than any cultivated crop, required nothing beyond whatever soil it landed in. Then the 20th century reshaped how people thought about their yards. The post-war lawn movement, heavily promoted by chemical companies looking for peacetime markets for herbicide products developed during the war, identified the dandelion as the primary visual enemy of the uniform green lawn. Decades of advertising followed, framing it as a pest, a failure, a problem requiring chemical intervention. And it worked. An entire generation grew up learning to spray something that the previous generation had grown up learning to eat. The nutritional profile of dandelion never changed during any of that. The greens contain more beta-carotene than a carrot, more calcium per calorie than milk. The root, dried and roasted, produces a liver-supportive herbal remedy currently sold at health food stores for $12 a bag. The flowers are edible raw or battered and fried, a preparation that has been on European tables for centuries. And the plant propagates itself so efficiently, every seed head releasing dozens of seeds that can travel miles on the wind, that every dollar spent on herbicide to eliminate it from a lawn is, to some extent, a temporary measure. Someone decided it was worth an ocean crossing. The industry that came later decided it was worth killing. Both of those decisions happened in the same country, within about 300 years of each other. Number 2. Amaranth. When Spanish colonial authorities consolidated control over the Aztec Empire in the 16th century, they moved to dismantle the systems that had sustained Aztec civilization. Political structures were suppressed, religious ceremonies were restricted, and the cultivation of amaranth was formally banned. Amaranth was not targeted because it was dangerous in the way weapons are dangerous. It was targeted because it was foundational. Along with corn and beans, amaranth grain was one of the 3 crops that fed the Aztec population and powered the tribute economy. It appeared in religious ceremonies in ways the Spanish found threatening enough to prohibit. Banning its cultivation was a direct attempt to weaken a civilization by cutting into its food supply and removing a plant that had cultural significance far beyond its calories. The ban could be enforced in cultivated fields. It could not be enforced in nature. Amaranth went feral. kept growing in disturbed soil and along roadsides, and has been classified as an aggressive weed in most of the Western world ever since. The tall, fast-growing plant with dense seed heads that pushes its way into garden borders and vacant lots without asking. Those seed heads carry a grain with a protein content of 14 to 18% by dry weight, higher than wheat, higher than rice, higher than corn. More usefully, amaranth contains lysine, the essential amino acid that most grains are structurally low in, making it a more complete protein source than any of the major staple cereals. The leaves are also edible, cooking down like spinach, giving the plant a dual harvest profile similar to lamb's quarters. 2 crops from one plant that grows aggressively in disturbed soil, costs nothing, and needs no cultivation whatsoever. The Spanish banned it 500 years ago. It responded by going feral. It has been growing in the margins and feeding people ever since. Number 1. Stinging nettle. The first experience most people have with stinging nettle ends the relationship before it begins. Brush against the stems or leaves, and microscopic silica needles inject a combination of formic acid, histamine, and serotonin into the skin. The burn starts within seconds and can last for hours. The natural response is to stay away from that plant permanently. For most people in the Western world, that's exactly what happens. The problem is that this one reaction has kept one of the most nutritionally dense plants in the temperate world almost completely untapped by the people living closest to it. Stinging nettle carries up to 35% protein by dry weight, more than virtually any other leafy plant available. It contains iron, calcium, magnesium, vitamins A, C, and K, and a range of anti-inflammatory compounds that have been studied for effects on arthritis, blood pressure, and blood sugar regulation. Ancient Egyptian medical texts reference nettle infusions for arthritis. Roman legions carried the plant into Britain and used deliberate contact with fresh nettles to warm joints against the cold, a practice called urtication that remained in documented use in European folk medicine for centuries after that. In Nepal, it has been a staple food plant for generations, cooked into soups and eaten as a green. Across Iran and parts of the Middle East, it appears in traditional dishes, in ways that treat it as a normal ingredient rather than a hazard. Here is what changes everything about how to approach it. Heat neutralizes the sting completely. Boil the young leaves for 2 minutes, dry them, or steep them as a tea. The compounds responsible for the reaction break down entirely. What you're left with after that is a green with a flavor close to spinach, a texture that holds in soups and stews, and a nutritional profile that most cultivated vegetables can't match. The sting is the entire reason most people walk past it. Remove that with 2 minutes of heat, and what's left is a perennial, self-sustaining, zero-cost food source that has been feeding people on 4 continents for several thousand years. The most avoided plant in the garden turns out to be the most useful one in it, and that's it. So, which of these weeds are you going to try first? Comment down below as you leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.